Hi there, I'm Annalisa, and this Christmas, my mother told me there was no room for failures at our family table. I stood on their porch, gifts in my arms, thinking maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But I was wrong. They shut the door, and something inside me broke. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Have you ever been turned away when all you wanted was to belong? Tell me, what was the moment you realized some doors are better left closed? Drop your story in the comments. I'm here to listen. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and cold metal as I stood on my parents' front porch, arms laden with bags of carefully wrapped gifts. The December air sliced through my coat, but I hardly noticed it. My fingers tightened on the fabric handles, digging into my palms. The weight of everything, not just the presents, bearing down on me. Scranton's quiet streets were dusted in a soft sheen of snow, and for one foolish moment, I believed this year would be different. I had arrived early, hoping to help set the table, laugh in the kitchen, maybe even feel like part of something. Hope clung stubbornly, fragile and trembling. Maybe this time they'd see me. Maybe they'd open the door and all the years of almost would melt away into something warm. The door creaked open, and there stood Patricia, my mother. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for me or the gifts or the hope bundled between my hands. Her eyes swept over me like she was seeing someone she didn't expect or didn't want. A breath, a beat, and then her words fell like sleet on raw skin. Christmas is no place for failures. I stood there frozen. The words didn't immediately sink in, as if my mind needed an extra moment to translate the language of betrayal. I forced a small mechanical smile to keep my hands from trembling, to keep my chest from cracking wide open. I searched her face for a glimmer of kindness, some sign this was a bad joke, but her expression was carved from stone. Somewhere inside, a reel of memories flickered. Christmas mornings when I woke up first, eagerly laying out the gifts I'd spent months saving for, always hoping someone would notice how hard I tried, how much I gave. When had trying stopped being enough? I shifted the bags, the plastic biting into my wrists. Patricia glanced behind her, towards the golden-lit living room where laughter bubbled and warmth spilled. None of it meant for me. Then she looked back at me, her mouth tightening. "Take your gifts back. We have enough." I swallowed against the rising burn in my throat. I nodded, because that's what you do when you don't want to cry where everyone can see. Turning carefully on the icy step, I made my way back to the car, the snow soaking through the hem of my coat, each step heavier than the last. Inside the car, the silence wrapped around me. The dashboard lights flickered dimly, casting soft shadows on the heap of forgotten gifts beside me. Ribbons glinted in the low light like tiny, mocking smiles. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, letting the cold seep into my bones, into that hollow space opening wider in my chest. Maybe I always knew. Maybe I just couldn't admit it before. I looked up once more at the house. The windows blazed with light, the silhouettes inside shifting and merging like a world I'd been locked out of long ago. I watched until the outlines blurred through the sting in my eyes. Sometimes, the door closes long before you realize you're no longer welcome inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted ham, laughter spilling from the main dining room as I stepped inside. Warm lights gleamed from the ceiling fan overhead, casting a glow over the polished hardwood floors and perfectly arranged table settings at the center of the room. It should have felt welcoming. It didn't. I stood awkwardly, shifting my weight, feeling the melted snow drip from the cuffs of my jeans. Patricia's smile was thin, rehearsed, the kind reserved for neighbors you barely tolerate. "You'll be more comfortable here," she said, guiding me toward a folding table near the kitchen, just beside the trash can. The main table was already full. Scott, Caroline, their kids, some cousins, a few neighbors, all laughing too loudly at jokes I hadn't heard. I sat down slowly at the small table, the chair wobbling slightly under me, and set my coffee down. The air smelled like turkey, pine needles, and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. I wrapped my hands around the mug, trying to absorb some warmth, pretending I was part of something bigger than this sliver of a holiday. Memories crept in without permission. birthdays spent with paper plates and half-hearted songs, college acceptance letters that got lost under stacks of Scott's overdue bills. Patricia swept past me, a platter of mashed potatoes in hand, not even glancing my way. The chatter at the main table roared louder, the kind of conversation that didn't leave room for outsiders. Every word, every laugh seemed like a ripple pushing me farther away. Dinner began. I watched from my seat as dishes circulated around the big table. No one thought to pass them toward me. I waited a moment, then another, before standing up and awkwardly scooping a small portion of cold green beans onto my plate. No one noticed. Plates clattered, forks scraped, glasses clinked. I tried to find something to focus on, something steady. A Christmas ornament spinning lazily from the chandelier, a child's laughter bubbling up. It was almost enough to pretend for a while, until the plates started piling up. First it was one, a dessert plate, half a slice of pie sliding across it, then another, and another. Without a word, without eye contact, people began setting their dirty dishes on my little table. My lukewarm coffee was nudged aside to make room. I froze, gripping the edge of the table, the legs of the folding chair creaking under me. They didn't ask. They didn't even see me. I wasn't just forgotten. I was furniture. Somewhere between the appetizers and dessert, I realized I wasn't one of them anymore. The clatter of dishes drowned out the music humming from the speakers. I sat perfectly still, surrounded by remnants of a meal I hadn't been invited to share. My fingers tightened around the mug again until my knuckles turned white. I didn't move to clear the plates. I didn't offer to help. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, while the world spun a little faster without me. The living room was a blur of flashing lights and crumpled wrapping paper, laughter stretching too thin over the growing pit in my stomach. Gifts piled under the glittering tree like promises meant for someone else. The kids squealed, tearing open packages with little fists, and the adults hovered nearby, hands clapping, mouths smiling too widely. I lingered by the edge of the room, watching the chaos unfold. My hands felt strangely empty without the bags I'd carried earlier, the gifts I'd chosen with more care than anyone would ever realize. I caught a glimpse of them under the tree, stacked neatly in a corner, the wrapping paper unmistakably mine. Patricia moved quickly, her hands efficient. Without so much as a glance toward me, she plucked several packages from the pile. A few swift motions later, the name tags had been switched. From Scott and Caroline. No hesitation, no guilt, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood frozen, heart squeezing painfully against my ribs. They weren't just taking the gifts, they were erasing me, neatly and cleanly, like crossing out a name on a grocery list. I was an extra set of hands, nothing more. The children rushed forward, arms outstretched, squealing Scott's name as he leaned back, modestly brushing off their thanks. Caroline, standing slightly behind him, caught my eye for a fraction of a second. Guilt flickered across her face before she looked away, busying herself with an empty cup. Family members gushed over how thoughtful Scott was, what beautiful gifts he had picked out. Someone clapped him on the back. Another relative teased Caroline about how lucky she was to have such a considerate husband. I forced a smile so tight it hurt. When someone said, "You've always been the heart of this family, Scott," I laughed a little too loudly, hiding it behind a cough. The bitterness in my mouth tasted metallic. As the evening wore on, the room filled with the smells of pine and spice cider, but the warmth never touched me. I remained invisible, the ghost who had packed the boxes, tied the ribbons, thought about each child's favorite color, their little quirks, the tiny details no one else bothered to remember. A camera flash lit the room, smiling faces turned toward the lens, frozen mid-laughter. I slipped quietly out of frame, a deliberate step backward that no one noticed. From the kitchen doorway, I watched as Scott soaked in the attention that should have never been his. He stood tall under the blinking lights, his arm wrapped proudly around Caroline's shoulder, his smile wide and easy. They didn't steal my gifts. They stole the last parts of me still willing to try. The laughter had thinned to a brittle hum by the time I drifted back into the living room. Dessert plates sat abandoned on laps, glasses half drained, voices lowered into conspiratorial murmurs. The smell of burnt sugar and old wood lingered heavily in the air. I stood at the threshold, invisible again, my presence barely a ripple across the surface of the evening. Conversations buzzed around me like static. I caught phrases, fragments, small victories, big promotions, weddings, baby announcements. Everyone had something to celebrate. Everyone but me. I tried to anchor myself with the cup of coffee in my hand, its contents long gone cold. I sipped it anyway, tasting only bitterness and ash. Then Scott's voice rose above the rest, casual, easy, weaving its way through the crowd. "You know," he said, laughing a little, "Annalisa really turned her life around. Back when she was struggling, I'm the one who pushed her, told her to get serious, clean up her act." A few aunts gasped in admiration. Someone clapped him on the back. I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. The room tilted slightly, the noise warping into something thick and distorted. My mouth went dry. Even my victories were not mine to keep in this house. The degree on my wall, the job I fought for, the nights I spent stitching myself back together after they left me behind. All of it, now part of Scott's narrative. His charity case, his success story. Patricia chimed in, her voice light and approving. Scott has always been the responsible one. He's carried this family in ways no one talks about enough. Walter said nothing. He swirled his drink idly, staring into the amber swirl like it held all the answers he didn't want to give. The applause was polite but real. Nods of agreement moved like a current through the room. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs, a wild thing desperate to escape. The weight of 100 silent betrayals stacked themselves neatly on my shoulders. Every time I had swallowed disappointment, every small hurt I had excused away, every silent forgiveness I had offered them, it all pressed down until I could barely breathe. A camera flash broke through the room, capturing the proud smiles of Patricia and Scott as they posed arm in arm. I wasn't called into the photo. I didn't step forward. Instead, I backed into the shadows, blending into the wallpaper, shrinking until I disappeared entirely. The laughter swelled, but it was distant now, muted under the roar in my ears. My fingers dug into the fabric of my coat sleeve, anchoring me to something solid, something real. I realized finally that no effort of mine would ever be enough. No gift carefully chosen, no achievement hard won, no apology whispered into the void. Some battles aren't fought with fists. Some are lost with applause you were never meant to hear. The cold stung my cheeks the moment I stepped outside, the warmth of the house sealing itself behind me like a vault. Light snow fell in soft spirals, brushing the driveway and the sagging bushes lining the porch. I pulled my coat tighter around me, though it barely seemed to matter. The chill had already seeped under my skin. I pressed my hands against my face, feeling the rawness there, the heat of humiliation clashing against the freezing air. Maybe if I stood there long enough, the cold would numb the places inside me that still hurt. Maybe it could quiet the voices replaying tonight's scenes, the fake smiles, the stolen moments, the applause that wasn't meant for me. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Walter, my father, standing inside the doorway. He watched me for a moment, our eyes locking through the thin pane of glass. For a fraction of a second, I thought he might open the door, say something, anything. But he didn't. He looked away first, his gaze dropped to the floor, to his shoes, to anywhere but me, and then quietly, methodically, he closed the door. I heard the click of the lock sliding into place, sharp, final. I stayed frozen where I stood, my breath curling in front of me in thin, desperate clouds. Snowflakes landed on my lashes, melting into tiny rivers down my cheeks. I didn't bother to wipe them away. If they could abandon me this easily, maybe they had been letting go long before I noticed. My shoes grew heavier as the snow soaked through the fabric, the cold gnawing at my ankles. But I didn't move. I couldn't. It wasn't just my feet that were stuck. It was something deeper, something tethered to the years I spent trying to earn a place in a house that had never truly been mine. Behind the locked door, I could still hear the muted murmur of conversation, the clink of dishes, the hollow laughter that filled the spaces where love was supposed to live. I turned slowly away from the house, my body moving before my mind could catch up. The driveway stretched before me, endless and unfamiliar under the gathering snow. I didn't rush. There was no one left inside worth rushing back to. At the edge of the driveway, I paused and looked back one last time. The lights in the windows glowed golden against the dark, a warmth I now understood had never been meant for me. Some doors don't slam shut. Some just quietly lock you out forever. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Muted Christmas lights blinked lazily on the small artificial tree in the corner, casting soft, tired shadows across the room. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling untouched in front of me, staring through it like it held answers I hadn't been brave enough to ask. My phone buzzed against the wood. A message from Caroline. My chest tightened. I hesitated, 1,000 possibilities tangling in my mind before my thumb moved on its own. "I need to tell you something." The words blurred for a second before snapping into brutal focus. Scott had been using the money, not for the essentials he swore they couldn't live without. Not for the kids' school supplies or groceries or gas. Gambling. He had siphoned off everything I sent, every dollar I gave thinking I was keeping them afloat, and fed it into machines that blinked and beeped and swallowed hopes whole. The room tilted slightly, the edges of my vision narrowing until all I could see was the screen and the endless parade of memories it shattered. All this time, I wasn't helping a struggling family. I was feeding a black hole. Caroline's second message came a few minutes later, almost as if she needed to find the courage to send it. Dates, amounts, receipts. The timeline stretched back further than I wanted to believe. Times when Scott had begged me for help, claiming emergency car repairs or overdue medical bills. Pleas wrapped in urgency, guilt sharpened to a razor. And not just the money I had given willingly. Loans in my name, quietly taken out, quietly defaulted on. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes until fireworks exploded behind them. Forgiveness wasn't just off the table. It had been burned to ash and swept away with the winter wind. The walls around me felt smaller, the air heavier, as I scrolled back through old texts from Scott. The ones where he promised he'd pay me back, where he thanked me for believing in him, where he painted himself as the beleaguered brother, misunderstood and unlucky. Each word cut a little deeper than the last. Each thank you was a knife disguised as gratitude. I scrolled all the way to the most recent unread message from him, sitting like a landmine at the top of my inbox. For a moment, I hovered over it, my thumb trembling slightly. Then, without reading it, I deleted it. Some debts you don't pay back. Some you burn down with the bridges they built. The weak January sunlight slanted through Caroline's kitchen windows, casting pale lines across the cluttered countertops and floor scattered with abandoned toys. The house smelled of dust and something forgotten. It felt tired, as if it too had given up pretending to be a home. I sat at my own table miles away, stirring a cold cup of coffee, when the message came. "I'm done. I can't stay here anymore." No punctuation, no explanation, but none was needed. Caroline had packed quietly, methodically, while Scott was out. A grocery run, maybe, or another trip to pretend he still had control over anything at all. No notes left behind, no tears soaking into the carpet. Just 2 suitcases by the front door, and a determination sharper than any goodbye. When Caroline showed up on my doorstep with the kids, her face was pale but steady. She clutched the hands of her daughters like lifelines, the 3 of them shivering under coats thrown on in a hurry. She didn't cry, she didn't apologize, she didn't need to. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is leave without a speech. I stepped aside, letting them in, letting the air between us speak the words that would only bruise if said aloud. We made up the spare bed, unfolded extra blankets. I brewed tea neither of us drank. Caroline sat stiffly on the couch, staring at the muted television screen, like it might explain how things had unraveled so fast and so quietly. The phone rang an hour later. Patricia. Caroline's hands trembled, but she didn't move to answer, so I did. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the static. "You've ruined everything," she spat. "You're tearing this family apart." It didn't matter if she was speaking to me or Caroline. In Patricia's mind, we were the same now. Traitors, threats, Inconvenient truths. Caroline finally found her voice, brittle and cracking. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "It wasn't safe. It wasn't—" "You think you're better than us?" Patricia hissed. "You and your savior complex?" The line went dead after that. Caroline sagged into the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Maybe they're right," she said into her palms. "Maybe I am selfish. Maybe—" "No," I said, kneeling in front of her so she had no choice but to look me in the eye. "This was already broken long before you left. You just stopped pretending." For a long time, neither of us moved. Outside, the sun dipped behind the skeletal trees, dragging the winter afternoon into evening. The children slept curled up together on the spare mattress. Caroline finally exhaled, a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. I sent a single text to her phone. A number, a name, a lawyer. If they wanted a battle, they picked the wrong women to fight. The house looked the same, but nothing inside it was. 2 weeks after Christmas, Patricia and Walter hosted a family gathering, pretending the fractures hadn't splintered deep enough to shatter. Fake smiles floated above tepid coffee and half-eaten pie, their edges sharp and tired. I stood at the threshold for a moment longer than I should have, letting the winter air cling to me before stepping into the fog of pretense. The second I walked in, a heavy silence sank over the room like wet cement. Conversations faltered, eyes darted, back stiffened. No one said hello. No one offered a seat. It was not a welcome. It was a summons. Scott was waiting. He rose slowly from his chair, gathering the room's attention like a conductor before the first note. His smile was tight, brittle. "I guess we should talk about what happened," he said, his voice light, rehearsed for the audience. He turned toward me, like a man ready to deliver a closing argument. "Annalise's bitterness," he said, pausing dramatically, "is what tore this family apart." A few gasps, some murmured agreement. Most simply watched, hungry for a show. Scott's words sharpened, each one a barb. "She poisoned Caroline against me, twisted everything, and now she stands here pretending she's the victim." Outrage flared in my chest, but it burned under layers of something heavier. Grief. This wasn't new, it was just louder now, sanctioned by the people who should have loved me most. They needed someone to blame, and I had stopped standing still long enough for them to aim at me. Patricia nodded along, her mouth pressed into a thin, satisfied line. Walter didn't meet my gaze. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. No one stopped it. Scott wasn't finished. He had been whispering his lies behind closed doors for days, telling them I was manipulative, selfish, calculating, that I had orchestrated Caroline's departure, poisoned the well he drank from. Some relatives started to step back, figuratively and literally, their expressions closing off. I stood there, absorbing the bruises, feeling them bloom across old scars. I could have stayed silent. It would have been easier. It always was. But something inside me, the part they had tried to stamp out, to shrink, rose up, steady and clear. I spoke. Not to defend myself, not to win them back, but because sometimes the truth needs to be said out loud, even if no one listens. I laid it bare, the loans, the gambling, the manipulation, the quiet betrayals stitched into every family dinner, every forced holiday hug. I spoke simply, calmly, not to plead, but to carve the truth into the space where my silence had once lived. No one interrupted, no one apologized. When I finished, the room was colder than the January air outside. I gathered my coat from the banister, slipping it on slowly, methodically. My fingers didn't shake, my shoulders didn't slump. I walked to the door without looking back. They buried my name under their lies. I dug it back out with my bare hands. The morning air in my apartment was crisp, the kind of clean cold that wrapped itself around your lungs when you inhaled. Thin winter sunlight slipped through the threadbare curtains, pooling over the worn wood floors and the chipped edges of the table where I sat with a cup of coffee growing cold between my hands. There was no ticking clock here, no hum of someone else's expectations vibrating through the walls. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that didn't demand an apology for existing. I sipped the coffee, tasting nothing, and stared out the window at the skeletal trees swaying gently against the pale sky. Somewhere across town, Scott was packing up his office, after losing the job that had once been his badge of honor. Patricia rarely answered her phone now, withdrawing into the heavy, dusty quiet of her own making. Walter still walked the same loop around their backyard every morning, but neighbors said he no longer waved when they greeted him. The world hadn't ended when I walked away. It had simply rearranged itself around the hollow spaces left behind. Caroline sent pictures sometimes, the girls playing in their tiny new living room, mismatched furniture and all, their faces bright in a way I hadn't seen in years. No apologies attached, no explanations needed, just life, imperfect and beautiful. Invitations trickled in from the old house occasionally, half-hearted offers for dinner, a cousin's birthday party, an awkward brunch to catch up. I let each one slip through my fingers like sand. Some doors stay shut because they should. Not all battles are meant to end in reunions. Some simply clear a path for breathing again. I dipped the paint roller into the soft yellow I had chosen for the living room walls, laughing to myself when a drop splattered onto my cheek. It was the color of early mornings, of second chances, of no one else's opinion mattering anymore. In the corner of the closet, I found the camera I had buried years ago under a pile of regret and practicality. I blew the dust off the lens, cradling it carefully like a forgotten part of myself. I signed up for a night class downtown, something small but steady. A promise to myself that trying again didn't make me foolish, it made me brave. The mail came in a soft thud against the door. Bills, advertisements, a letter with no return address. I picked it up, turned it over once, twice, feeling the weight of it in my palm. I set it on the table without opening it. Some things deserve to stay unopened. Some things lose their power the moment you refuse to chase the apology you never needed. I leaned back in my chair, letting the winter light bathe the room, letting the stillness soak through me without fear. Some doors stay shut, some you leave unopened by choice. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that never get spoken. Walking away from a family that couldn't see me, couldn't honor me, wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. Healing isn't loud. It's quiet decisions made alone in small apartments, painting your walls yellow because you can. You don't need permission to choose peace. You don't owe anyone your suffering to keep an illusion alive. If my story leaves anything behind, I hope it's this. Sometimes saving yourself means walking away from the people who once taught you how to stay. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from something or someone you once thought you couldn't live without? What gave you the strength to choose yourself? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this video touched your heart, please comment 1 inch or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate with you, tell me why. I'm always here to listen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories that heal and inspire. Your next chapter might just start with the next video.